The governor has, I guess, called for proposed $20 billion over 5 years. Can you walk me through or walk us through the funding sources for that $20 billion?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Wright. So I think our staff has started to meet. My understanding is the staff from the Department of Budget has started to meet with the legislative staff to brief them on the sources of the funding. So rather than get too far into the detail right now, what I would say is the budget absolutely contains a substantial amount of new capital funding for the next, in this year's budget, but adequate for funding much of our plan for the next 5 years. And then in the 5-year capital plan is the rest of the capital funding needed to meet our 100,000 unit commitment.
You're calling for construction of about 50,000 new affordable units and about 6,000 supportive housing units. It's an aggressive construction timeline. Is that truly feasible?
It's absolutely feasible, sir, and it's really the missing piece. The agency has done extraordinary work, as I mentioned in my opening testimony, just in the last few years to show that they can meet any goal that's set in front of them. What they need really was more capital for the existing programs, and that's what this budget provides.
The new units, will there be green? I mean, everything is building green right now for conserving energy and such. Will that be a part of the construction of the new units?
Absolutely, sir. The agency has taken a number of steps in the last few years to incorporate green standards and other sustainable measures into all of our requirements, and we'll do so going forward.
I don't want to take too long because housing is an issue that everyone seems to be an expert on, and certainly there are nothing but experts here. But last year's budget process, well, let me just say this. Our New York City public housing authorities have been neglected over the years by not only the federal government, but the state government and also the city government. And this is some of the best housing stock in the city of New York. And the state budget, and specifically the legislature, specifically Assembly in particular, came up with a absolutely historic allotment of capital, somewhere around $100 million. Which had never been done, and something that I think we all up here should be proud of. And we were able to give that money to the New York City Public Housing Authority. What is the status of that money from last year's budget?
So you're exactly right, Mr. Assemblyman. The commitment of $100 million from last year's budget was historic, much needed. As you say, NYCHA needs money. I believe we announced, or it was announced by the governor back a couple of months ago, that the first $40 million of that $100 million had been allocated to number of critical security projects that were listed out at the time. And I know that that work is underway on those projects between NYCHA and the agency the state agency that's overseeing the work, DASNY. I believe that the full capital, it's called the NYCHA Capital Revitalization Plan, is under review by the Department of Budget and should be completed very, very soon, at which time they'll provide to your legislative staff.
So you're saying 40 million of the 100 million has been allocated?
That's correct.
And that's specifically for security cameras and such?
Correct, cameras and other security measures.
Okay. And what about the next 60 million? And how and when do you perceive that monies would be allocated to the New York City Housing Authority?
My understanding, sir, is that the capital revitalization plan that it actually contains the entire 100, but the remaining 60 is the part you're asking about, is under review at the Department of Budget, and its release is imminent.
Do you know about how long that would take, that review process?
I don't, sir.
Well, and the reason I'm asking is that folks from the New York City Public Housing Authority have stated, no, we haven't gotten any money and such. So and of course, we are all committed to the bottom line of trying to make sure that the folks from the New York City Public Housing Authority don't get caught up in bureaucratic delays and such, because they certainly need the money, and we have to get that money out the door. So I think that's good. I mean, I think the security cameras and such, security for public housing is essential, and hopefully we'll be keeping an eye on that, making sure we can get that other 60 million out of the door. Mitchell-Lama, you talked about Mitchell-Lamas in your testimony. Could you expand on how we're helping to keep that great program alive?
Absolutely. It is a great program, as you say. It's one of the really historic contributions to middle and affordable housing, middle income and affordable housing that the state has made over the years. And I suspect that there's nobody on the panel in front of me that doesn't have at least one Mitchell-Lama development in their district. I know I had the opportunity to talk to Senator Little about hers last week. The governor is fully committed to restoring the Mitchell-Lama properties that are out there to a state of good repair. Because of the nature of the program, many of them over the years have sustained substantial deferred maintenance. His House New York billion-dollar House New York plan that I mentioned in my testimony was, for the most part, a several $100 million commitment on the governor's part to bring the Mitchell-Lama portfolio back into repair, and at the same time strike agreements with those buildings where possible to keep them affordable at the same level for the next 40 years. And we are, I think, more than halfway.
For the next how many years? I'm sorry.
40.
40.
Yeah, wherever possible. And the agency is about more than halfway towards its goal that the governor set with that. So towards the entire portfolio that we are responsible for, we're about halfway towards bringing it up to speed.
The chairman of this committee, the gentleman who gave the opening remarks, his district office is located in one of our premier Mitchell-Lamas, and I'm sure that he would like to stay there for the next 40 years as well.
I'll make a note of that, sir.
I'm thinking on that.
You're thinking about that, okay. One last question, Commissioner. The TPU, I know that there's been some success in terms of the tenant protection unit and that it was funded, I guess, last year, supposedly fully funded to the extent of about $5.1 million. And you're talking about it's being fully funded this year, but it seems the money has gone down, maybe to 4.7 or 8, I think. Is there any talk of expanding the TPU, because it's really seems to have met with some success, and I think it's helped a lot of tenants. Assemblyman,
I share your pride in the work that the TPU has done. It was one of the early contributions that the governor made to the field of tenant protection when he formed it several years ago. As you know, the TPU is a proactive investigative arm of the Office of Rent Administration, and it's funded every year as part of the ORA budget, and the same is true this year. They've been able to score some extraordinary successes in bringing back online, for example, tens of thousands of units that should have been registered as rent stabilized with the ORA, and had, for one reason or another, left the rolls. They've also, working with the members of a joint task force, the Attorney General's office, and City HPD, managed to bring some groundbreaking actions against landlords who were illegally harassing tenants, and we expect that the same work with the funding that is in the budget, the same work will be able to go forward the next year and year after that.
Thank you. One last question. In 2015-16, we appropriated $439 million from the J.P. Morgan Chase settlement to various housing programs, and I believe only $20 million of that has been spent. Why is it moving so slowly?
Your numbers are right. About $439 million from the J.P. Morgan settlement funds. About half of that actually was allocated to our agency. It was entirety, as my understanding is, the entirety was for housing purposes, but not all of it was for housing work that's done by our agency. We share with other agencies some of the responsibility. Of the money within our agency, $100 million of it is the NYCHA money that we just discussed, so some of that is on its way. And then the remainder is actually well on its way out the door. It was just as sort of a procedural matter. It was appropriated in last year's budget, so call it April 1st of last year. And from there went out through a number of RFPs, our usual capital allocation process, so that the public had the opportunity to apply for the money through the various programs that it was spread through. Those applications are back in. My understanding is the awards have been made and contracts are just being signed. So it's actually on pace with our usual capital process, and the money is moving out the door. It's gone through our usual process.